When the first fleet sailed into Sydney Harbour in 1788, they noticed the local Aboriginal people fishing from bark canoes, using spears, fishing lines and shell fishhooks. They also fished off Manly Beach and various rocky headlands. There were a number of Aboriginal clans in the local area. The coastal clans lived off fish and shellfish, whereas those further inland hunted animals using spears, woomeras and tomahawks. The total population numbered a few thousand souls. Present radiometric dating of the remaining Aboriginal sites produces ages usually of a few thousand years, but some date as old as 40,000 years. So the ancestors of Sydney's inhabitants survived the freezing cold of the last glacial maximum and witnessed the gradual 120-metre rise in sea level as the climate warmed by about 10 degrees Celsius. The infant colony of New South Wales was a chaotic and desperate place. The ships had brought little food, so rations kept being reduced. People were starving and were whipped or hung if caught stealing food. The convicts shuffled around in leg irons, doing hard labour, and built the first government house using the local sandstone. Its surrounding lands were planted with seed, but the crops failed because of poor soils. Cornish convict farmer James Roos planted wheat in 1789 on a property at Parramatta. After several crops, the farm was profitable and he was given the first land grant in the colony. Governor Phillip was desperate to make contact with the locals, so he kidnapped 3 of them. The first was a man called Arabanu, who died of smallpox a few months later. The second, Colbee, escaped, and the third, an intelligent, high-status warrior, was called Bennelong, who ate like a horse and mastered the English language quickly. The enlightened linguist, Lieutenant Watkin Tench, kept a diary. Bennelong's second wife was Barangaroo, who refused to drink wine and went berserk when she saw convicts being whipped. She died in 1791 and was buried in Phillip's garden. On a visit to Manly Beach in 1790, Phillip was speared by a warrior through the shoulder and back. He ordered that no one be punished. Watkin Tench was quite an explorer and was the first European to climb Prospect Hill in 1789. This painting of the hill was done some years later. Bennelong travelled with Phillip to England in 1792. He met Lord Sydney and nearly died of a chest infection. After 3 years, he was back in Sydney with Surgeon George Bass, whom he taught Darwin. He rejoined his tribe and eventually died at Kissing Point in 1813. European farms spread around the Parramatta area, up Prospect Hill and on the banks of rivers. A new government house was built at Parramatta. Prominent locals included Elizabeth MacArthur, who ran a sheep farm called Elizabeth Farm. Another Aboriginal leader called Pemulwuy came to prominence. Initially he traded meat and fish with the Europeans. Annoyed by the spread of disease, fencing of Aboriginal land and killing of kangaroos, he led the Eora, Darug and Tharawal people in a campaign of resistance to settlers, spearing soldiers and settlers, burning crops and killing livestock until he was shot in 1802. This reserve at the side of Prospect Hill is named after him. Several pioneering geologists explored Prospect Hill. The survey ship Beagle dropped anchor in Sydney Harbour in 1836, at the end of the third year of an arduous 5-year voyage that left Charles Darwin a sick man. He explored as far west as the Blue Mountains. He was impressed with the athleticism of the natives, climbed the hill, and described prismatic basalt columns underlying sedimentary rocks. The Rev William Branwhite-Clarke was a Fellow of the British Geological Society in 1826 and arrived in the colony in 1839. He was a tireless individual. He served as minister in a number of Anglican churches, as well as supplementing his meagre income by mapping much of eastern Australia on horseback, writing numerous articles on science for newspapers, and was founding curator of the Australian Museum. Sir T.W. Edgeworth-David was a national hero and was appointed a Foundation Geology Professor at Sydney University in 1891. He travelled to the South Magnetic Pole with his pupil Lawson and was one of only 2 Allied geological engineers who served the Allies in World War I. At his state funeral in 1937, the whole of Sydney stopped as crowds lined the streets. The professor was a great one for excursions, and geology was compulsory for all students. He is halfway up a cliff at Prospect Quarry. His students included state premiers and prime ministers. The Sydney Basin is a 5,000 metre column of sediments that were deposited in a sinking area between 300 and 230 million years ago. There would have been more sediments on top, but these have since eroded away, leaving the older sediments to be cemented together into hard rock. This east-west cross-section shows that basaltic magma rose from the mantle and finished its journey below the surface inside the 240 million year old, 250 metre thick Bringelly shale of the Wainemata group. This is what those shales look like. They are brown at the top because water and oxygen change the oxidation state of iron in the shales from grey +2 to brown +3. This is an example of chemical weathering. The magma rose and spread out between the shale layers around 168 million years ago in the early to mid-Jurassic. Laccoliths are normally mushroom-shaped, but this one collapsed in the centre under its own weight and acted like a pressure cooker with jets of magma pulsing up the feeder dike for some million years. This is a sample of the Prospect dolerite. There are 2 main minerals, black augite and white felspar. It is a medium-grained rock because it cooled slowly underground, giving the crystals time to grow. Here we compare it to the chiamallatite, which is also a blue metal used as rail track ballast. The latite is a fast-cooling lava, and most of its crystals are small. This is one of the finest geologists Australia has produced, Dr. Germaine Joplin. Her book, A Petrography of Australian Igneous Rocks, includes diagrams of thin sections of prospect rocks drawn under polarised light. I have colorised them for you. The left diagram is from the edges of the laccolith intrusion, the chilled margin that cooled faster. The right is from the centre of the laccolith and has larger crystals. Here we have more diagrams. The dolerite chilled margin shows small crystals of white felspar and black augite, as well as bigger crystals of green glassy olivine. Pickrite from the base of the intrusion has bigger crystals of everything. Syenite veins are sometimes found cutting other rocks. Olivine is lacking. These veins cutting the shale could well be syenite. This geological map of the Sydney area is a more modern version of Clarke's map. The light green is the older Hawkesbury sandstone. Sitting on top are the Wainemata Group shales in blue. The Prospect Hill dolerite intrudes that and has been exposed by erosion. The yellow and brown areas are loose river sediments and sand dune sediments. This map of the intrusion was published 2 years after I visited one of the dolerite quarries excavated deep into the hill. Even the shale was a resource, and some of it was used to make bricks for housing. Early roads in the colony were muddy, windy tracks. Quarrying of blue metal to surface the roads began in the 1820s. The first railway line to Parramatta in 1855 required dolerite ballast to support the rails. This is still the case today. Dozens of companies operated on the hill for 190 years. This is a quarry in 1934. This 1945 picture shows a big steam-powered excavator loading trucks. For a time, this narrow-gauge train ran from the quarry to Parramatta. These days, we make roads using a mixture of blue metal and imported tar to produce asphalt. By 1998, the best dolerite rock had been mined out, leaving just olivine-rich pickrite at the base. It was decided to close the quarry in 2012 when I took these pictures. This is pickrite rock. Add water and air and it starts to weather away to form an iron-rich clay. You don't want roads made of that stuff. You can see it weathering here. In came the bulldozers to level the soil for housing and industrial development. At the ends of some streets, good dolerite rock remains, but it can be prone to collapse. Water has been a major problem for the colony since the tank stream became polluted and began to kill people. Water was then sourced from Busby's convict bore in Centennial Park and the Botany sand dune swamps. They are now polluted by organochloride chemicals leached from chemical plants. Enter Sydney's fourth source of water, the Prospect Reservoir, shown on the left of this satellite photo. In 1820, famous explorer William Lawson built a home called Veteran Hall on his property next to Prospect Hill. When he died in 1850, it was acquired by the Water Board, who wished to build a dam drawing water from the Nepean River Reservoir. In 1888, Prospect Dam was created by constructing a 26-metre high, 2.2 kilometre long earthen wall. These days water is pumped to it from Sydney's major dams, the Avon, Cataract and Warragamba dams. Prospect Dam has a capacity of 50 gigalitres. This is part of the plant. The complex is getting old, but can screen and filter water. There is a public reserve next to the dam, and it is worth a visit. I found places to photograph rocks from a bike track. I describe Australia's water problems in my video Our Fragile Continent that I made a decade ago, and the problems with coal in my video, Australia's Coal Story. Since then, few people can ignore the effects of global warming on our water and food supplies. You might like to recall what you have learned about these people.